Welcome everybody on behalf of the Warehouse Art Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Strauss Company, an auction house in Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to a very special exhibition of William Kentridge, the title of which is See for Yourself. It has quite a long run from July 8th through to December 16. And I'm very pleased to say that there are quite a number of prints on exhibition. Printmaking in Kentridge's work is very important because he documents, he archives his performances, his videos, his operatic performances, and everything else there. And there is a sense of permanence and deep thought put into all of those prints. These prints have been well documented in such publications as William Kentridge Prints from 2004, published by David Crick Publishing in Johannesburg. That was followed by a retrospective exhibition of his prints, William Kentridge Trace, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2010. And very recently, we have seen the first publication of a very comprehensive catalogue raisonné of his work, compiled by Warren Siebritz in Johannesburg and published by Steidl in Germany. This is the first publication. It is a precursor and it looks exclusively at the domestic series of prints, as you can see from the cover over there. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Jessica Meuninck-Ganger, and she is Prints and Time-Based Media Works, and her prints and time-based media works have been exhibited in museums, both experimental and commercial galleries, regionally, nationally, and internationally. Her works on paper is included in several private and public collections, including the John Ack Museum, the Weissman Museum of Art, the St. Kate Arts Hotel, Northwestern Mutual, University of Milwaukee, the Library Special Collections, the Target Corporation, and her work has also been included in contemporary publications such as Faber's Sustenance, Contemporary Printmaking, Richard Noyce's Printmaking Beyond the Edge, and Nathaniel Stern's Interactive Art and Embodying Implicit Body as Performance. She earned a Bachelor of Sciences degree at the State University and Master of Fine Arts degrees, Studio Arts at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. She's currently the Print and Narrative Forms Area Head, Associate Professor, and co-chair of the Department of Art and Design at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and an executive board member of Anchor Press, Paper and Print. What Jessica didn't mention was that she was the organizer of a phenomenal international printmaking conference in 2013, and that is where I met her as well. She was very kind to organize a special international exhibition where she invited curators from Argentina, Mexico, China, South Africa, Poland, and South Korea to come to put together print making from their various countries. And she very kindly invited me to do the South African contingent of which. And as you can see from the 6 printmakers I included in the South African selection, I also included William Kentridge. And this was the work that was exhibited at the Innova Art Gallery as part of the university's suite of galleries, self-portrait as a coffee pot. Okay, Jessica will also remember during that conference, the Milwaukee Art Museum exhibited the series of etchings, 30 etchings of William Kentridge from his Nose series. And Jessica will walk us through this. Now, Jessica, I want you to talk about the impressions you have of this wonderful exhibition at the warehouse, the layout of it. You are Professor of Printmaking, so the processes involved in some of the various printmaking processes that Kentridge follows, as well as some of the collaboration and social engagement. Collaboration also, just to add, I'm later going to introduce Kim Berman, Professor of Fine Art at the University of Johannesburg, and she will talk about a number of collaborations that she was involved in working with Kentridge. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then Jessica will take us from there.
I'm Jessica Meuninck-Ganger, and I want to thank Wilhelm for introducing me. And this is a really special gathering. It is, as Wilhelm mentioned, I had hosted the Southern Graphics International Conference in 2013 titled Printmaking. And that came after a series of visits to Johannesburg. I was collaborating with the artist Nathaniel Stern, and he introduced me to Wilhelm and Kim Berman and all of the wonderful, the whole art community within Joburg. And I just, I feel like we cemented relationships, lifetime relationships. And I found the work that was there so inspiring. I did get to meet William Kentridge during a visit, and David Krett and Jillian Ross, a printer with William Kentridge, who collaborates with him, and totally, completely cemented really meaningful relationships with that whole contingent there in South Africa. I visited Artist Proof Studio, and I'm speaking from the perspective of a person who is a printmaker. I studied printmaking in undergrad. If I had a tattoo, it would be of a brayer. I love it. I really feel like I want to be an advocate for that discipline. And so when I went to South Africa, I really wanted to see all of the print shops. I visited Artist Proof Studio. I was so blown away with its mission and its history. And so during the conference, I invited Kim and her collaborator, Pamela Lara, to curate the show of the history of Artist Proof Studio, and it was phenomenal. And I'm excited to say that we're actually setting up a print shop very similar, inspired by that mission, in Milwaukee, called Artist Press Paper and Print. So all of that, we're all joined, and it's all from this inspiration that began in Johannesburg, and our common thread here is William Kentridge. So when I walked, when John Shannon and Jan Sayre set up this exhibition at the warehouse of their collection of prints, I just couldn't believe that it was returning. This exhibition would be here for my students. There is no other, I'll say this, go on record, there really is no other printmaker that spans every discipline or every technique and process of the printmaking discipline. And the fact that this is here, I can bring my students, how lucky they are. And I just am privileged to have be part of this panel, so it can be archived so my students can see this in the future. When I entered the gallery, there's this hanging display, the studio and life. And immediately, just knowing William Kentridge and how he views that cycle or that circle of making and thinking in studio and life, they aren't separate. What he does in the world comes into a studio, and it's evident within all of the printmaking that you just see all of these layers and these images and these processes that turn up in every single print. They are so rich. And again, I'm not sure there are printmakers out there that have a hybrid experience, but he combines all of the techniques in this delicious chili. It's amazing. Like, all of these ingredients create these really delicious prints. So I wanted to include these slides because it really does show that these two things, the studio and life, you walk through those through, like physically walk through these and they become one. Here he is circling in his studio. The circle comes up so often in his work, and he's circling and exploring an extraordinary scope of media. He encourages active viewing. Seeing the show, just seeing it in the space and seeing all the prints individually, you view it in circles. You're constantly moving. He has this talent, or this this genius of activating the viewer within his prints. And that comes through in the initial drawings, it comes through in generating the plates, and then it transfers to the viewers and how we move around them and try to, distinguish all of the different aspects. Here's a print photogravure of his studio that shows like the actual objects, and then the drawing, drawing of a space in the back, and it just kind of blurs what's drawn and what's real into this beautiful process. I'll be talking about this process later, but this is still just like the layers in the studio and the making where they all merge. And this is an image of a person viewing the prints, like even these circular processions. This is a person standing admiring Atlas procession number 1. Even the prints make you kind of like turn and move around, and you see the maps are kind of shifted that require that you move. There's letterpress in there. Like all of these different elements require that you just not stand in a static place and take it all in. You really have to move around it in order to really appreciate everything like that. And these combinations of techniques, like he loves to draw, they're very spontaneous, but the route to get to the end product is the most convoluted and complicated process to get to the end result that still looks very fresh and intuitive and expressionistic, which I find just really remarkable. Here's a couple of prints that's circular. One is circular kaboom because it hints toward the music. This was part of a recording, a vinyl, pressed vinyl with Kentridge based, like the sleeves were all printed with his prints. Every aspect of it had his hand. And then on the left, there's the procession again. So on the Atlas procession on your left has etching, aquatint, dry point, lead, like all of these techniques in like pressed into one print that looks seamless. It looks like a seamless, or a seamless, not seamless, it looks like a seamless illustration of imagery, but the different passes through the press and the different papers that are stacked together is just really outstanding. But with all of these, even with the kaboom, really is like pulling all of your senses. Even a print before that is just a photogravure or a singular impression, you still feel all of the layers of animation, of music, of sound. When you look at these visually, they have rhythm, they're all time-based. This one, Kaboom, is an archival pigment print, and it's a soundtrack to a 3-channel film installation, which the sleeves are printed on a heavyweight paper. And there's the sleeves also are printed with a Japanese washi. He uses washi, which is a mulberry paper, in many of his prints. And as Kim was talking about the handmade paper that she's working on too with her their new lab, I think that's super exciting, and I love that idea. Okay, so this is the small Atlas procession, which is an etching, lithograph, and a collage on matte paper. Now, collage or matte paper, chincolle and collaging, he's adhering different papers onto a backing paper and then printing on top. So it all merges together. Again, seemingly seamless, but the amount of passes and the precision of all of that is just really mind-blowing. And then when you walk through the gallery, you see all of these objects. I would love to go with William Kentridge out antiquing sometime, because his love for these viewing devices and this history of time-based media and viewing imagery is just really phenomenal. And I just love that you walk into his exhibitions and you see the whole history. You're walking in, he works in a printing museum essentially, because he's using presses that are no longer relevant in real like commercial printing companies. But he's making all of these really contemporary expressions using all of those historical devices. And so I just love that just the exhibition itself, you see these objects scattered all about the exhibition that really engages the viewer, and you get to just the curiosities, it just piques all of your curiosities. And the idea of like figuring out how to place all of the images to animate them and so that they would be viewed properly. Like on the left, you see this photogravure that has to be, that you see through a special lens that combines them together and gives the image dimension. It's really, I'm just astounded by the way that these are planned out. And not only are they separated and planned out, but they're illustrated through printmaking, which is another whole layer of complexity. Here's a close-up, and here's a close-up of this print here. Talking about time-based media, I adore the refugees. This was published at Artist Proof Studio, and even the series of plates cut into these rectangles and then adhered, hold on just one moment here, adhered to the cotton cloth. So they're printed on handmade paper and then mounted to the cotton cloth. This also gives a cinematic or an animated expression, just because when your eye travels across the piece, there's a break and a break and a break and a break with all of these different, like it kind of reminds me of those old maps that are hinged together and to make a whole. Like you go on this journey along with the refugees by looking at each rectangle and that whole rhythm going across the surface of the print. It's just really, it's beautiful. It's beautiful that all these materials merge together into the cotton fabric, the paper so beautifully meshes with the fabric, but it's also beautiful in that it has just so much movement. It's printed on the fabric, but then washes over that, kind of connect the eye flow. I just think it's just really that the whole idea of all of these things, all of these prints, even a singular print, is time-based. This is the band shell, Central Park band shell that's untitled. And I was looking this up and I saw there are so many states. These were very out in the world. And when we talk about states, a state is when you take a plate and you render it. In his case, he uses predominantly copper, and then you scratch and burnish areas out and you redraw it and reprint it. So if you look at the one on the left, you see these areas of these like these speakers that are there. And then if you look at the one on the right, you see them very clearly, and you would look at the one on the left and they're very faint in there. And that's because he's drawing over it and over it. This requires so much labor. In fact, I do a printmaking boot camp with my intaglio students that create drawings, dry point drawings and etchings on copper plates. And I make sure that they scrape them and burnish them down and then redraw them and print them again. And they're just like, oh my gosh, it's like torture. But it requires so much labor. But it creates, with all of these states, it just creates a history, a movement, and further animates. It tells the story and extends the time of each print. All of these separate states, these different versions of the illustration are really small editions. I was shocked. They're like 4, edition of 4, edition of 6. When I talk about editions, if you look in the bottom left corner of these prints, you'll see a mark that has a number over another number, and that indicates the number of prints of that impression and that specific exact design that was printed on a piece of paper that many times, exactly how it is. And then if you see another one that's somewhat different, it'll have a different number on the bottom, and you see how many impressions were inked, put through the press and pulled, and then you have that final piece. So I love the idea that he reworks the plates. Traditionally, printmakers will what we call cancel a plate after we print a specific amount of prints. When we decide how large our edition will be. We'll cancel it by putting a big X through it. All of his work seems to have a life and is reborn and is repurposed into something else. And for my personal practice, I'm very inspired by that. And I tend to keep the images alive, and just like the circle of life in studio, those memories are never left behind. They keep coming back and coming back into the work. You're revisiting the symbols, the techniques, and all of that. This book is Sheets of Evidence. Oh my gosh, this is gorgeous. When you see it in the exhibition, it's in a light box and it's dark most of the time. And then you flip on the light, and then all of a sudden the light comes through and you see it reveals the imagery on the paper. And I think that the exhibition designer for this did a brilliant job in putting this together, in that you would read the book and you would hold it up to read it if you were able to touch it, right? But there's the problem in galleries and museums where you're not invited to touch the art for preservation. And so this light box not only protects the paper from the UV light, but it also engages the viewer to be active in the viewing. And so I think this is really amazing how this was. And the handmade paper is delicious. And this is just a view of some people hand making paper. So you're suspending pulp in water and then you're pressing it. And with these images, oops, I'm going to slip back. These were created, I thought initially that it was wire, like a traditional watermark, where you place wire in a mold on a screen like this, and you pull up the paper and you press it down and that image shows. But I believe he created plates of his drawings that were raised. They were kind of had a relief surface. So then when the paper gets pressed into that, the areas of the paper are really thin where the drawing is raised on the plate. So that was just really fun to see. Again, there's some 3D works within the exhibition. These cups were commissioned by let me check my notes here. It's the Illy Cup, and that was commissioned for their collection. I think it premiered at the Venice Biennale. And these cups also activate you to move around and view the image from different vantage points and different perspectives. And these were, commercially printed, but just really amazing, where you see the graphic on the saucer showing up into the cup. And so I when I take my students, when the semester begins, I'm going to show them just when you're thinking about printmaking. This is a great example. This is a lithograph, Medusa, a lithograph that when you see it in the cup and the object, it seems the right proportions. But when you see it splayed out on the print underneath the cup, it's really, skewed and stretched out. And I just think, what an amazing drawing exercise that would be, to have to stare at the cup and draw your image onto the paper, so that it, just the math and the physics behind that just kind of blows my mind. And the fact that this is a lithograph, so when you create a lithograph, you're creating it on a stone that's then printed to a paper. I've got an image of this later on. But so the reversals, the reverse thinking, it really just shows the brilliance of this artist. Here's a close-up. I mean, really, can you imagine creating this so that it appears the right, with the right proportions in the cup? Just blows my mind. This is probably my favorite print in the entire exhibition. And I was standing with John Shannon, and I realized that this was one of Kentridge's early lithographs. And I saw that it says 1933. And when you look at a print, you're creating an image on, in this case, it's a linoleum block. Sometimes they're pieces of wood. But if you think of a stamp, the stamp is always backwards, right? Because when you print it to paper, it goes in reverse. And so when I always do demonstrations with my students about printmaking, I always say, now, if you're using words, or if the orientation of the view is important to you, you have to do everything backwards. So I'll demonstrate this by going up to a chalkboard and writing printmaking backwards. And because I've been doing it so long, I can write, I see everything in reverse. And so when you look at this, you see 1933 with the 3 and the 3 in reverse, and a person could say, oh, it's an early print. That's a rookie mistake, right? I don't think so. And John and I were looking at this, and we were thinking about what happened in 1933. Well, Nazi occupation. What is William Kentridge's heritage? Well, he's Jewish Lithuanian. So, this is an image of his grandfather. So this is a story of his history. And the 1933 being backwards is intentional. Anytime you shift the expectations and you see a number or something that is intentionally in reverse, it causes you to stop and think about that and think about, okay, now why would that be done? The other reason why I included this print is because of the mark making. And if you look really closely at some of these marks that are used by carving it out with a gouge, they have a lot of the same characteristics of more of his newer prints. So that circular motion around the exhibition. Now these are at opposite ends of the gallery, but I see them as like it's a really fun comparison, because if I look at the marks right here, I can see similar marks here, even though this is an image that looks very brush-like and painterly. This is from the 8 color charts, which is also amazing because each of these prints have a backing paper with a paper mounted to the backing paper, and then they show like the pigment name, letterpress printed beneath. So all of these show the different types of brush that Kentridge uses. So imagine these painted using a brush, and and I'm sure he's very particular about his brushes, whether they're new and have a crisp line or they're old and maybe have some history with the kind of broken bristles to create these variety of marks. So you see all of these prints in the suite that are prints on paper mounted to paper. And you can see that Kentridge is using a variety of different pigments as indicated in letterpress at the bottom of the print. But you also see, you can imagine, or I can imagine, the different brushes that he's choosing for each pigment. So you can see like a thicker brush or maybe a thinner brush. And some of these could be new and pristine brushes. Some of them could be used brushes that are built up, that have a longer life with the bristles kind of splayed. So in my classroom, I typically have brushes that students have left in glue and have hard bristles, but they make really incredible marks. So I love the fact that he's making these very intuitive and gestural marks, and then they're carved away in the linoleum. So this isn't directly ink painted onto the paper. They're brushed onto linoleum block and carved away. So like all of these little grooves within the lines are actually carved away with a linoleum cutting tool. When I'm always interested in who collaborates with William Kentridge for these prints. And if you are in a museum, or if you are looking at different prints as a collector, or just an enthusiast, you'll see in the bottom corner, it's called a chop mark. And these are blind embossments and it's used like a notary stamp often, or sometimes it's a punch. And it compresses the paper and it creates this raised surface. So I can, and so when I was at the exhibition, I kept going and trying to find, some of those were covered with a mat, but those that showed the printer's chop, I was just really excited. I love the idea of collaboration, and Kentridge does work with there's an artist proof studio chop on the right, and there's a Capshaw press, I believe, chop on the left. And if I don't know the chop, I typically go and try to look them up to see what workshops Kentridge or any artist has been working with. So a lot of this action happens in a a collaborative setting or a communal setting with a lot of people in the space. I think Kentridge really thrives on that. And he is coming from a printmaking background. He was trained as a printmaker. He understands it, and he knows the value of being in a space and sort of absorbing what other people are doing. And, you know, that sharing or that exchange of technique and perspective is really phenomenal. I just had to throw in a little thing. This is the artist press, paper, and print that we're setting up in Milwaukee. So inspired by Artist Proof Studio. So thank you, Kim. We're doing it. We have a space. But here again, here is some images of linoleum cuts. So you can see the original drawing, and this kind of refers back to the 8 color studies or any of the prints that he does, where you can see the raised element of the ink painting or the ink drawing with the areas carved away. So that raised area prints. So it's such carving, and these plates are such, it's an object, like how it's just is phenomenal that his work has so much movement and these beautiful gestures, but it's carved from a material that is such a static object, but he breathes life into it. So, you know, I wanted to share this and how beautiful these are. And I'm going to fly through this, but this is the stencil technique. I was going to talk about this in relation to all the different printmaking techniques. And a stencil technique is where you think about screen printing, or maybe even stencils if you've ever stenciled something onto a wall. But these were made by cutout papers, and that the grime was power washed away by the fire department. Here's one of the stencils here. So, you know, there's a protective cutout that keeps the water from cleaning those other spaces. So that's very similar to the screen printing process. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but I just think that's so fascinating. Here's a night view. And I love the fact that this is ephemeral and that it has a short life and it washes away. My students do mud stencils quite often because it's the legal graffiti, right? So we can take mud, push them through the stencils and actually dirty the walls rather than clean them. And, you know, we have very social justice themed department at UWM. So we're putting a lot of messages out in the world by that process. And going back to that idea, like William Kentridge is, because he's coming from the printmaking discipline, and printmaking has been discussed by so many for so long as the democratic medium because it's accessible. You can create multiples, and throughout history, it's been used to disseminate ideas as propaganda, all of that. So I think that everything in his work needs to be mediated through this medium. That's like, it's the message, right? Like all of his, you know, he does do paintings and drawings and all of that, but this communicates even more since it is rooted in that history. So this is a print that was a collaboration with Jillian Ross and the team at the David Critt workshop in Johannesburg. And this was imagery taken from that wall. And I just love the fact that it's held together and placed on the wall with these pins. The process begins with ink paintings or drawings, and then everything is pieced together. And when you go to the David Critt's workshop website, it really details this whole process and how they chose the paper so that it would meet flush and wouldn't move or pull up under the pins. Like every part of this image is so thought out and intentional. So in the carving, Kentridge provided guidelines on how he wanted it to print. In fact, the guidelines, even in the images, he would say what direction the wood grain should be and how it should be carved. So he's thinking, he's collaborating and having his collaborators, his carvers, and Jill, who's a master printer, he's having them actually cut the marks, but he's thought 3 steps ahead of what they've already done and mapped it out for them to do. It's interesting because in that earlier woodcut that I showed from 1933 or of 1933, it wasn't made in that time, obviously, but it has like the same sort of raw marks at these because he's so interested in how, just has it all planned out and is so descriptive in how he wants to have it done. What I love about this is the carvers were asked to rotate the blocks between them every 3 minutes when carving to prevent a particular carver's mark becoming dominant. So I love that idea, right? Because we all have what we call our signature within our printmaking practice. So my marks are definitely just Meuninck-Ganger carve marks. So the fact that they're shifting and turning and passing it around in order to mask that mark, that signature within the print, I think is really fascinating. And I actually think I'm going to create some kind of project with my students about that because you kind of have to let it go. So here's a couple more prints from the exhibition. And when I teach my classes, I pull out prints, and the first thing that I do is I try to ask my students, or I ask my students to identify the prints by feeling the paper and looking at the edges. And what I loved about this print on the left, which is an untitled early lithograph, and the print on the right of the domestic scenes, is you can see the marks of the object that the prints were created. So on the left, it's a lithograph. And if you look closely, I don't know if you can see my cursor, if you look closely in person, you see the edge of the stone. And that's actually a risky way to print if you're using a paper that's larger than the stone, but somehow he's printing it with very brave printers, using it so that the pressure actually creates an embossment around the edge of the stone. You'll see a slide coming up so you can see what I'm talking about here. These are multiple plates that are laid out, inked, and then laid out on a press. And then a wet piece of paper, dampened paper, is placed on top. So you see this embossed edge that helps one recognize that it is an intaglio print. And in an intaglio print, you must have a dampened paper and the pressure to pull the inks from the line inside the print. I'll talk about that in just a second. So here's Kentridge working on a stone. He's working on a different print than what's shown here, but you can see the irregular edge of probably a Bavarian limestone. And then if you were to see this print in real life, you would see that edge along here. And the edge comes up so close to the drawing. So it must be, he was working the entire stone. If you look at the stone here, there's gum Arabic. He's created like a stencil edge here. And the drawing is based here. So then you wouldn't have that edge of the stone so close to the drawing material, that's kind of radical. I mean, that's brave. Just because the pressure of the press can crack a stone. And to see that as a printing professor, I thought, oh my gosh, that takes some skill and some trust in your stone and trust in your printer and your presses. That's pretty phenomenal. Here he's working on a plate. These aren't the same plates over here. These are smaller plates in domestic scenes, but you can see him using an etching needle or a scribe or a stylus and drawing lines onto the plate. And many of his prints will say dry point, and you'll see a super fuzzy line. Let's see if I can, here's a good example. This is orbit. These really fuzzy lines are scratched in using a tool that you just saw in the previous. And what that does is it takes bits of the copper and it creates a channel to hold the line, but you also get these little bits of copper rays so that when what you do is you wipe ink across the plate and the ink fills down into the lines, and those burrs from the copper catch that ink and they create this like fuzzy line or fuzzy quality. And so here's a little example that I pulled from the Seattle Art Museum. So if you use one of these as dry point like Kentridge does, when you scrape across the plate, it moves that material up to create a little burr. So that holds ink, and that's how you get that create that fuzzy line. You'll see other lines in an image that don't have that fuzzy quality. Those could be etched in an acid, or those burrs can be sort of smoothed off either with a fingernail or just worn down. So, so then to even look closer, here are the tools on the left, and then you see that fuzzy line that creates a little bit of I don't know, it's a different line, right? It's not crisp like these over here. It's got a fuzz and it has more dimension, and like that three-dimensional quality of a line I just find really gorgeous. You'll see that a lot in his plates, and that's just the metal kicking up. I talked a little bit talking about the band shell, about states, and how you'll start with a plate, do some lines, or this may be in this plate either drawn lines, or maybe just the nature of the plate being scratched as it exists in the studio. I've had students put plates in their backpacks to, you know, get some initial ground, some line work on there. And then an image is rendered in the second state on that same plate. So you'll see these marks echo around, you know, from each plate to the next. So in the second state, this is copper, and they're like scraping into it. So it's not an easy task. And then, you know, taking impressions, printing these to paper, taking multiple impressions, and then working back into it, drawing in more, scraping areas out, adding more marks in, until, you know, like there's no fear. What I love about this is students and printmakers feel intimidated by these materials. You think of drawing on paper, you can easily erase it. Well, really, copper is just as malleable. You can draw into it, you can scrape it out. It just really, Kentridge's fearless approach to these materials as being very malleable and plastic is just really admirable. So when I teach, I share that with my students. And this one I think is really beautiful in that this is from Blue Rubric. So this was a digital print initially with screen print over the surface. And what's really beautiful about this is, and what he does in a lot of his prints, this is, okay, catch my breath, I get real excited about this. So when you walk into the exhibition, you look around the room and there's this sort of very limited color palette, right? It's usually black ink. There are a couple color prints in the exhibition, but most of it's just black ink in the natural colors of the paper. This is really bold, right? And this is, these refer to instructions printed in prayer books, conventionally printed in red ink. However, this was a pigment that was given to him as a gift from Afghanistan. And that was mixed, you know, he collaborated with a printmaker and they mixed that pigment in a vehicle, probably an acrylic, to screen print through a screen. So like even the ink has a history and a message. And here, this is a stencil process. So you're pushing the ink through an open area of a screen that you see here, very similar to the stencil process used on the frieze in Rome with the power wash. But here you can see it in action. And this one, I was so excited to see this print in person. I'd never seen it in person. So what's fun about this one is when I'd see these prints in a textbook, I thought it was wrinkled paper. I thought, and it's not. It's you know, the first layer on the screen is just a really subtle, well, couple layers, right, on this brown paper is just a really subtle shift to create that movement in the background. And it's probably an illustration. I tried to see if I could recognize the illustration behind that in that layer, because I felt like that history had meaning and maybe it was embedded behind there to make it intentionally of what we don't see. This was from the Joburg Centennial. And it was meant to be, I read that it was meant to be wheat pasted around, you know, in the theme of, or in the tradition of printmaking. but it didn't end up being that way. And then here's the suite of prints. Here we come, full circle back to the studio, some photogravures. Here's Jill Ross printing, doing test prints of some of the photogravures. I tried photogravure once. Oh, it was a disaster. So this process is to take photographic imagery and I mean, why do photogravure, right? You can take a photograph. But what this does is it impresses the photographic image within a rag paper beautifully with a plate mark. And there's just really nothing as delicious and velvety as a photogravure print. I tried it. Oh my gosh, it is so hard. So you have to create this film. You cover the copper plate with a light sensitive film. It's very toxic, but we do it safely. And then you expose with light a photographic image onto the plate. And then you have to put it through multiple etching baths where the strength of the etch is so precise that if it is just a little bit off, you leave it in there a little too long, it'll undercut the exposure or that film on the plate and ruin the complete image. I have such respect for photogravure masters. It really blows my mind. I tried it. That's just one thing that I just haven't been able to perfect. I do these other means to get to a similar result using polymers and things like that. But this is just, it's mind blowing. So here we are looping back to the studio and life. And I hope you enjoyed the perspective of a printmaking teacher, professor, and a total fan of William Kentridge. And I thank you so much.
Oh, Jessica, that was unbelievable. We hung onto every single word you said.
Thank you, Jessica. That was so fantastic. You have such a great insight. And it was so wonderful to see how you talk about those prints. Yeah.
Yeah. And walk us through the whole exhibition, and covering everything in detail. It's fascinating. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful to introduce Kim Berman. She is a National Research Foundation rated scholar in South Africa and full professor in the visual art at the University of Johannesburg and executive director of Artist Proof Studio, a community-based printmaking center in Houghton, Johannesburg, which she co-founded with the late Nhlanhla Kaba in 1991. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of the Witwatersrand in 1981 and a Master's in Fine Art from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, Tufts University in the USA in 1989. She completed her PhD at the University of the Witwatersrand in 2009. She has lectured and exhibited widely in South Africa and internationally. She's committed to engaging arts for social change through her activism and teaching. Her book, Finding Voice, A Visual Approach to Engaging Change, was published by the University of Michigan Press. And this is what the cover of her book looks like. And the basis of her inquiry and what she reflects on in this book is how the visual arts contribute to positive social change. Finding Voice represents the notion that the visual arts are an expression of the aspirations of people in their hope for a more just and democratic society. It emphasizes the power and the potential of collective voice in the visual portrayal of historical injustice and the envisioning of a new paradigm in which to move forward. This book then values the notion of voice as a key to agency and the responsibility to act. As I mentioned, Kim was the founder of the Artist Proof Studio, and there you see a host of artist printmakers with which she has worked during her directorship there. In 2012, the Artist Proof Studio celebrated their 21st anniversary, celebrated widely in the press in South Africa. And the phenomenal aspect of this particular celebration was that the whole of the Johannesburg Art Gallery was cleared, and Kim appointed various curators to put together magnificent shows of the various activities that the Artist Proof Studio engaged in up to that point. She is, however, best known for the collaborations with William Kentridge at Artist Proof Studio. And you can see quite a phenomenal list of projects that she successfully completed. Kim, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can talk about the collaboration that you, Artist Proof Studio, and William Kentridge enjoyed.
Thank you so much, Wilhelm. I think I've opened my screen to the same slide that you have, and I've added an extra work at the bottom with you who never arrived.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk to that as well. But thank you. It's a great honor and a privilege to be part of this panel, and certainly reacquainting with Jessica from many years ago, that same wonderful print conference that put Artist Proof Studio also had a showing. So what I think I'm speaking about today is a little bit about the collaborations that over the years that I've had the honor to do with William Kentridge. And I think the way we work with William Kentridge is he works in his studio. We prepare the plates at Artist Proof Studio and bring the plates into his studio, his home studio in Houghton, and William works on the plates. And it's such a privilege to watch him work, to collaborate with him. And quite a couple of years ago, Liz Chalfin from ZMAs came to South Africa and did a demonstration of coffee lift prints instead of sugar lift prints. And this is something he really took to. So we do a lot of coffee lift because it's so compatible with his ink wash drawings. And so he can do these coffee washes on the copper plates, which we then can lift and etch. So thank you to Wilhelm for these slides. I don't know, some of them I didn't know I had, but I think they slides over the years where we have spoken a little bit about the collaboration with William. And William is an incredibly generous artist. Artist Proof Studio, the mission of Artist Proof Studio is about providing opportunities for young artists and printmakers to learn printmaking. So we offer subsidized education. So most young people who come to Artist Proof Studio cannot afford the fees for tertiary institutions. And so we create a subsidy to support them. We get funding from various funders, but with the support of William Kentridge, a lot of our publications and projects with him, he's very generous in that Artist Proof Studio keeps 50% of the publications. We sell that, and that goes back into the sustainability of the studio. Artist Proof has over 100 artists affiliated with us, maybe 60 students at present, first, second, third, and fourth year. And that their trajectory is very much about professional development. So this image, particularly in Evening in Rome, was a way of presenting this new series of triumphs and laments. I think there are some wonderful slides of the triumphs and laments procession. I'm going to jump to that here, where Kentridge was commissioned by the city of Rome to do this 80-meter long mural on the Tiber River, which and the wall is just covered in a grime, which is a bacteria. And he, together with his collaborator, figured a way to cut out stencils and water blast around the stencils. So what you're seeing on the wall here is the grime that's left behind, and the clean water, the clean wall around it is just water blasted. So it's a very natural progression that the walls are going to start covering up with grime again. In fact, after 5 years, I think these images have almost disappeared and just left traces. And he really liked that idea of this notion of the river taking back these images. But the Triumphs and Laments project, which he presented at this evening in Rome, he made it as a fundraiser for Artist Proof Studio, and he really talked about Triumphs and Laments and took some of the images on that wall and converted them into monumental size etchings. And here you see him working on Garibaldi, which I believe is currently on exhibition at Strauss Company on auction, which is an extraordinary work. The editions were tiny, only 10, which meant that we co-published as five each. William had sent his 5 around to the various galleries, and Artist Proof Studio could exhibit Garibaldi on various exhibitions. So this is the first proof, and what happens is we actually hand make the paper for these editions. I have a research area at the University of Johannesburg that for many years has been developing an African handmade paper. So this paper is made particularly with a mixture of sisal and cotton, which accepts the etching surface beautifully. It's unsized paper. And here we've taken a first proof, then we put it up in the studio, and then Kentridge works over the copper plates again, and up to sometimes 4 or 5 layers of etching. We re-etch each plate until he gets it to the point that he's happy with. So here you see Nati and Bokang. Nati Ndlandla is our master printer at Artist Proof Studio, and Nati's been working with me, collaborating with Kentridge for this whole series. And you can see how each panel is hand printed here. Actually, they're mounting the work here, but each piece from the plate is printed on handmade paper and then glued very carefully with a methyl cellulose onto the backing canvas. And then the prints fold up as a book and fit into a clamshell case. Here is maybe one of the most ambitious prints we've ever done with Kentridge, which is Refugees, You Shall Find No Other Seas, which you saw here in its full glory. It's an extraordinary image. Became very iconic at his Zeitsmoker show. He showed this at in his exhibition in Cape Town, and I believe the Milwaukee Museum owns this work, which I think is one of his greatest works. So what is amazing is that these washes that you see behind the refugee boats. So it was an image that was taken from the time, but then obviously is so current because of the refugee crisis in the world. And the various layers of the washes are just splashes that it might take him 2 or 3 seconds to splash across the plate. Then it'll take us weeks and weeks and weeks to etch each plate with the splashes that then combine as layers on the print. So we had a fantastic 30th birthday celebration at the University of Johannesburg, presenting many collaborations, and Kentridge again in his generosity spoke about collaborations and showed us some of his work. And at that event, at that talk, we were able to also, he was producing the Sibyl, and he made these beautiful little leaves that became a fundraiser for Artist Proof Studio. And we had this notion that each leaf would be like the Simeon Sibyl, each leaf as a future teller would be a prediction for the future of a young artist's opportunity. And so each leaf supported an artist. We did another project, which was more recent. Artist Proof Studio for nearly 30 years has been in the bus factory in Newtown, which is in the inner city. It's been a fantastic hub for creative production. And over the COVID period, we decided we had to move because the city couldn't maintain the subsidized rentals and was no longer supporting the arts as a creative hub. So during COVID, we got a fantastic opportunity to move into an office park called the Isle of Houghton. And we collaborated with our longtime funder, the Rand Merchant Bank, who's offered to do a fundraiser for us. And Kentridge made these two very beautiful prints on lilies and a rose in the vase, which I think is here. They're quite gorgeous etchings, very, very beautiful. And we did an event called Flower Power. And basically it was a small edition, and these editions just sold out in one evening, but it raised enough money for us to rebuild the inner sort of articulation of the studio where we moved into. This is a more recent collaboration of the Kentridge lexicon pieces. Some of you may well be aware of these huge monumental sculptures that he showed at the Norval Gallery. Was a massive retrospective of his sculptures that were quite extraordinary because he's not known as a sculptor, and he took these tiny lexicons, which is part of a vocabulary and articulation of symbology, and then created a narrative where each object somehow talks to each other, and printed them in a composite. So one of the things I'd just like to focus on here is the relationship of papermaking. Now, papermaking has been something we've been researching at the university, and my various students have been involved in it. But we've developed a very special paper made from the sisal plant, together with a Chinese hemp that we imported the hemp, and now we are actually able to acquire hemp that grows in Malawi, where there's the hemp emporium. We're buying the twine hemp and making it into paper. And if you can see on the top left right-hand slide, all those various tonalities of ink, Kentridge loves the paper because its ability to hold such a vast range of washes. It really gets, maybe he sometimes has a color chart, I'd say a tonal chart of many layers of tones, which he's been working on these huge monumental trees that we've been mounting for him on paper. So this exhibition, these trees are going to be on exhibition at the Royal Academy in September. And he envisaged it as a kind of forest of trees, so working with his washes on each sheet of paper, we then meticulously take them apart and mount them for him. And then they get folded up and shipped around the world. So again, here you can see him working on the paper, the Pumani paper. It was interesting. Just a couple of weeks ago, he called me up and he said, the paper's doing something funny. The washes are turning a bit blue. And I thought, what is going on? And it turned out it was a different recipe of paper. It had cotton in it, and it absorbed the ink differently. And this one batch that we gave him had the cotton, and he totally was rejected that batch until he got the one with the hemp, which is amazing, because he is able to get that range. So I guess standing next to him and burnishing the plate and removing some of the areas that he isn't happy with, or if he lightens up, is such a gift and a privilege to be in collaboration with him. So I like this slide to put in. And the very last slide that I wanted to share is this series of digital prints. I think I opened the conversation with the generosity of Kentridge, but over COVID, I think the art community was deeply affected, in that a lot of the social grants, like from the National Arts Council, young artists weren't able to access grants, money disappeared, there was a lot of corruption. And I teamed up with Carl Bates, who's a businessman, and Lauren Wolf, who's a designer on our board. And they said, let's do something. And we approached William Kentridge, and he supported us starting the Lockdown Collection, where artists all contributed work. There was a fantastic auction, and we raised more than 2 million rand, which was then handed out in very small grants to over 300 artists. But following that, the next project we did was a campaign, which he came up with this image, Way All Tears, which was a billboard on the streets for many of the months of COVID, because it's such a potent concept. And we made it into, he hand paints the work on with lapis lazuli special pigment on journal paper. And we made an edition of 50 digital prints on Hahnemuller paper, and each work was sold for 12,000 rand, and that was the equivalent of a bursary for the students. And last year we ran 2 campaigns, one with Way All Tears, the other one, Oh to Believe in Another World, where young artists could respond to that, what that means, Oh to Believe in Another World, and imagining a different future that is possible. And we gave away 60 bursaries or scholarships to young artists. And just last month, we did a second campaign where he gave me this print, 15 Minutes on the Soft Shoulder, this idea that everybody needs a soft shoulder. Everybody needs, we're living in a place of scarcity. And then he said, no, it needs a partner. It is not enough, but it's not nothing. And this idea that people can make a contribution, people can make a difference in somebody's life. So an artwork has the agency of giving a scholarship to a young artist. And we have since handed out 60 more bursaries, which is 120 bursaries all in all. So that really has been a remarkable project on the side to work with William. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I hope I didn't take up more than my time.
No, Kim, that was absolutely fascinating. And if I'm not mistaken, you know that one title, Oh to Believe in Another World, is also the title of his latest work, where he took Dmitri Shostakovich's 10th Symphony and did quite a spectacular operatic visual display of that. And that is being shown, I think, all over the world at the moment. Most interesting, Kim. Thank you so much. It's really fantastic. It's a great privilege to work with you. And I loved every second of all of this. Kim and Jessica, you were fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks, Wilhelm.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.